beginning of
Yeah, it's good. Someone I feel comfortable with, so it's good. All right, we'll jump straight into it. So basically, I'm writing, testing, that's fine. So as I said in the emails, I'm writing about a whole bunch of people who I think are leaders in different creative fields, or not just necessarily creative fields, but where they've put together or helped bring something new that's good for the city and all that kind of stuff.
It's a great idea.
Glass half full type mentality, which I think is what's needed at the moment.
In this town?
In this town in particular, and we'll talk to you about that in a sec. But I guess the first question would be, when did you first hear about or come across the JamFactory?
When I was an art student in Tasmania, in Hobart, in the late 80s, JamFactory's reputation was already quite extraordinary. It was a place that was, viewed as some, utopian wonderland for people working in particularly ceramics, glass, jewellery, and I guess the art school I went to in Hobart had was one of the art schools that had a reasonably strong focus on applied art subjects. So it began with a strong textiles department, ceramics department, furniture department. It doesn't necessarily have all those now.
Sure.
Things have evolved a lot, but when I was there, the school had just opened, so it was a brand new school on the waterfront in the old IXL JamFactory buildings. Interesting. Synergy.
Yeah.
Is
that particular building conducive to that type of?
Don't know, but I mean, certainly that was probably one of the reasons why there was some knowledge.
Yeah, sure.
Or that assisted the knowledge. And I guess there were people who had come to Hobart to either teach at the art school or do postgraduate study who'd had a relationship with the JamFactory.
Okay.
Jeff Mitchum, who was the first head of ceramics, spent significant time after that in Tasmania running ceramics there, while Les Blakeborough was doing other things. So there were a lot of links. It was something I was aware of.
Yeah, sure.
And sort of held in high regard.
So then, to flow into that then, so when did the opportunity present itself to become the CEO of the,
that's a good
fast track, 20 years or whatever it might have been?
So, having worked in museums and galleries for the whole of my career, so I left art school and started working at the art school, running a small art supply shop and gallery. Mm-hmm. But when I went from there to Canberra, working at the National Gallery, and I actually commissioned the JamFactory, which by then was here in this building. So it moved here in '92. Mm-hmm. In the mid-'90s, I was managing commercial activity at the National Gallery, and I commissioned the JamFactory Ceramics Studio to produce, because I was aware of it, I knew it, and they were supplying glass and ceramics to our shop at the National Gallery. So I had this sort of commercial relationship with it. We commissioned them to produce all this ceramics for a blockbuster exhibition, a big Rembrandt show. And it was all this sort of blue and white Delft style patterns on ceramic wares. And that was a successful little kind of commercial venture, and that had me kind of connected. Then I worked for 10 years. I was at the MCA for a while, actually, and we, again, running commercial activity, some merchandise and retail.
So it seems like, we'll come to it later, but you had that business development kind of,
Yeah, I've always straddled across commercial activity and cultural activity. It's my personal point of difference in the world that I inhabit, and it's been really useful.
I think I agree, and it's interesting that you say that, because that's kind of what I think is the missing link a lot of the time with creatives, that connection between being creative and having ideas, and then the actual enterprise and entrepreneurship, which is sometimes missing.
Yeah, and look, I see it as the key role of the JamFactory in this sort of craft design area, is about bridging that gap between the culture and commerce, art and business. But so, I had this constant engagement with the JamFactory as a sort of supplier of product And then in the 10 years I spent at Object as associate director and curator, I had a much deeper engagement, I guess, with craft and design centres across the country, but kind of in some ways, particularly the JamFactory. JamFactory has taken a lot of exhibitions that I'd curated at Object. A lot of artists associated with the Jam were featured in projects that we did at Object. I spent 10 years there and was looking to get out, and it's actually Stephen Bowers, who's my predecessor, phoned me one day and said, look, the job was up for grabs. Was it something I was interested in? And I hadn't thought about it consciously before that, and quite enjoyed the role as a kind of, programmer, a content creator, which is a bit different to the role of CEO.
Managerial type.
Yeah, so I was, writing lots of books and curating lots of exhibitions and, being a protagonist creatively. But I was ready to kind of, I guess people had been anticipating I would do a kind of more...
It was a natural progression to that sort of thing.
And I'd resisted it for as long as was feasible, I think, and got to play creatively for a long time. But I saw the JamFactory as really a kind of... And I hadn't thought about it until Stephen kind of flagged it with me. But given the sort of wacky combination of skills that I had in terms of pretty high level commercial management and deep engagement with the craft and design sector over 20 odd years, it was like, of course.
Yeah, it just magically revealed itself like a fog kind of cleared.
And the bonus of at the time my wife was pregnant with our second kid, and the prospect of living in Sydney with 2 children as opposed to living in somewhere like Adelaide. I come from Tasmania. Okay. It seemed like it was a good time for a lifestyle change as well.
Sure.
So it was really serendipitous.
I've seen your house on the design files. It's nice. I guess being someone in your position that has some perks and that you could garnish your house with a lot of people.
Look, we couldn't afford that lifestyle in Sydney.
Yeah.
That is it's a fantastic prototype architecture project, and it's 50 years old, and it's
still
a beautiful space to live
in.
Means that I'm walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
Which is what you need to be at, which is what you need to do. I mean, Sarah and I, my fiancée, we made the decision that we were going to potentially buy something, and our budget wouldn't have allowed for anything remotely like what we want. So instead, we just made the conscious decision to rent. We live in North Adelaide. We're able to fix the house up. We rent, and it's a house that one just next door sold for $600,000, and we're only paying $350 a week in rent. So, and it's an old Greek lady who owns it, so she's letting us fix it up. So we've done the backyard, we've painted everything white, and now we can, it means we can afford to buy beautiful things. Yeah, it's a bit of a false economy, but one day that gap will close.
Completely.
But you walk the walk.
It's nice. It's nice to have the privileged opportunity to be able to do that, and a lot of those 20 odd years of working in the arts certainly didn't allow.
Yes, we do it for the passion of architecture sort of it has some similarities.
Yeah, that's right. It can do that. There's that long flat period.
Oh yeah. I'm only just learning about that flat period. They told us about it at university, but we're so wistfully naive and all that kind of stuff. You just kind of ignore it. But anyway.
It was a combination of the serendipity of the job coming up at a time when my interests were evolving, my interest in making a different kind of contribution to the sector that I'm passionate about, and being able to do that in a role that might allow me to really make a significant step change for the JamFactory in its national kind of role, international role. I've been very fortunate to have made a lot of connections and gained a lot of experience over that time. And what I did see when Stephen rang me and said this job was up for grabs was extraordinary opportunity here I could see an organisation that had incredibly stable foundations, great history, high regard, but in my view, desperately in need of greater recognition and an extraordinary opportunity to leverage its assets much more. It's extraordinary that something like this exists, and the public investment in it over 40 years has resulted in some extraordinary things in the city of Adelaide, South Australia. And I don't think that story has been well enough celebrated, and I don't think that the asset that has grown is being used nearly as productively as it could be. Something like the Design Academy in Eindhoven, which is a kind of regional backwater, effectively. For a time was the global centre for excellence in terms of design training. Now, we operate in a very different way, but it's an illustration of geographic location not being an inhibitor to being a global centre for excellence, and that's kind of what the aspiration for this should be.
That's good. I'll talk about that later as well, because that's something that's on my radar too. I'll jump on to that's great. We're only 2 questions in.
Yeah, I'll do that a lot, sorry.
No, it's all right. No, it's good. That's the whole point. I was nervous that I didn't have enough questions, but I'm sure that there's lots of crossover here. So I guess, well, then just quickly, because I'm sure there's a standard line about it, but basically, at the JamFactory Seppeltsfield opening, there was a few speakers, and they were all kind of glowing in their praise for Don Dunstan initially as the champion of the whole thing. Why do you think, and how did it come to be 40 years ago? What was what were the right ingredients that happened, like that allowed to happen?
Yeah, and bear in mind I'm 44, so it's all about an understanding of history rather than lived experience. And we're fortunate to have a whole bunch of people who are part of our community that were there.
Yeah, the legacy of it also.
And so a lot of my understanding is based on other people's first-hand accounts. There was a lot of reform going on. The political backdrop was an interesting one. It was a period of great reform and transformation, federally and at a state level. And the crafts movement was gaining great traction. So things like the establishment of the Australia Council and the Crafts Board of the Australia Council, and a series of state-based crafts councils in each state and territory. There was a lot of activism around that, and the idea of craft practice as a lifestyle. There was a sort of a lifestyle movement as much as it was about the economic opportunities that craft and design presented in an alternative lifestyle sense, but also in a and this is where Dunstan kind of saw the opportunity in a relationship to mainstream economy. That here you had a kind of an opportunity to have a value chain that saw kind of great value added through noble things, hand skills and materials that existed in abundance that were largely not being used for higher value kind of purposes. So there were political and economic imperatives, and a period of kind of optimism about reform. There was a group of people who were active in crafts practice, people like Dick Richards and Kay Lawrence and a host of others, who were interested in pursuing the idea of professionalisation of those crafts and saw the potential links to industry. And one of the interesting things is that much of that original Dunstan vision was about linking craft and industry. Now that never quite happened in the way that was envisaged.
Yeah.
And that was largely because the crafts movement became a movement really about fine art. Fine art objects made in craft media for commercial galleries and that kind of thing. So,
so the commercial replication.
Yeah. So the kind of high-profile exhibiting practices of artists who collected by the Art Gallery of South Australia and so on, rather than a kind of more Scandinavian type model, which I think was one of the original references to, pair up craft skills and industry to produce, the kinds of things that are produced by Ittala or Arabia, those big Scandinavian brands, where craft infused into industry to create a kind of, post-war boom around the design industry in those countries. It was very much a craft-led thing. Why Danish furniture was heavily crafted in that period. It's a rambling thing, but that context is interesting, and 40 years later, perhaps those opportunities to re-engage with industry are quite different, because some of those industries don't longer exist. There are no commercial ceramics and glass manufacturers anymore, but there are other areas where there are still real opportunities there, and that crossover, I think, is, as we have begun to value emotional connection to things through understanding how they're made and what they're made of and so on, whether it's food or whether it's...
There's a greater awareness of that in society than there may have been.
So the moment is probably riper now than it was then, but the landscape is quite different.
Yeah, that's good. Because again, I'll come back to that stuff again later, because that's at the end as well. No, it's good. So what did the first conversation about the JamFactory at Seppeltsfield sound like?
It's pretty interesting, because it was, 2 years and 1 month and about 10 days, according to our chair, that the first conversation happened, and it really was. And the context is interesting. So Laura Lee was here as thinker in residence. She had interesting conversations with the Barossa Regional Development Authority head, Anne Moroney. When the new owners took over Seppeltsfield and started developing their master planning, Anne Moroney suggested that they get in touch with Laura Lee, who they then subsequently engaged as an independent contractor to work on some of their master planning post her thinker in residence period. Okay. While she was thinker in residence, she discovered the JamFactory and saw it in the same way I do as an extraordinary model that is without equal around the world, and saw the potential for JamFactory to engage in all sorts of other things and opportunities. And so part of the idea for the Seppeltsfield master plan was to reactivate Seppeltsfield as a kind of artisan's village, with values that were consistent to the values that underpinned its winery operations, which
its origins,
has this kind of strong kind of artisanal history in terms of winemaking and premium kind of quality stuff. So the JamFactory seemed like an obvious fit in her mind. She and the owners of Seppeltsfield came to see me and said, look, we don't know where this could go. We don't necessarily have any money, but we think it would be great to do something with you guys. What's the most ambitious thing we could do? Literally, that's where we started. And it was like, well, we could replicate, we could create a campus of the JamFactory in the Barossa, and their aspiration around that was to have a glass blowing studio because of the connection to the link. That's right.
And looking at it now, like, they're beautiful.
Yeah, that is a perfect example of the kind of thing they had in mind. The cost of there are only two public accessible hot glass studios in Australia, one here and one in Canberra. They're expensive facilities to set up and maintain, so that was out of reach. But we've been able to create something that replicates the kind of values and certainly the spread of activity across studios, gallery and shop. So it was kind of an audacious ambition with no sense of how we might get there. But
when was the timeline? When did that sort of happen?
Like I said, two years ago.
Yeah,
literally. And so then we set about putting together a kind of business plan for it. We thought it was a compelling idea, and we sought some assistance from the federal government through tourism.
Yeah, through TQual and all that stuff.
Yeah. And then through state government, through Arts SA, and Minister John Hill was supportive, and a small grant, 120 grand, was enough to give us the confidence to proceed.
Sure.
And a lot of these sort of projects, they happen the other way around. They happen,
top down more.
Top down,
than
yeah.
bottom up.
So it's kind of a need is identified through some sort of planning process. Funding is allocated, and then a tendering process, or
Sure.
something. And then costs blow out. All the
People complain, and we didn't need this anyway, type thing, or.
So we were determined to kind of do it the other way around,
Yeah.
and to aim towards that objective until such time as it was unfeasible in some way, financially, whatever. And at each point, we just kept joining another dot. It was like, oh, actually, if we do this, and we don't need millions of bucks. We can do it this way. If we do this, then these partnerships will make it work, etc. So it was kind of just building little bits from the ground up, and I think the nature of the relationship is also one that we're prepared to take risks, and the kind of private. I mean, we're a not-for-profit incorporated association with a government-appointed board.
Mm-hmm.
So we're effectively public sector, and so it's a kind of public-private sector partnership, and that in itself is a pretty innovative model. And based on the success so far, and certainly the success of getting to the point of opening, I would say it's a model that could be replicated very effectively in the cultural industries, in other ways to achieve good public outcomes that are also good for businesses.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I'll talk. Maybe we'll go for a coffee afterwards, and I can talk to you about that. The other project.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's. I mean, you read that. I'm assuming maybe, and
skimmed it.
No, but it's changed so much in the last week. Anyway. So this is all very, very enlightening for me. I'll quickly go through some of the stuff you talk about in the book. So,
yep.
and I guess that JamFactory Seppeltsfield is part of that new vision. But what do you see this next phase that you talk about being? It's a combination of the expansion of the JamFactory.
Yep.
It's the business development model, the more commercial component, which was what the initial that was what the idea was 40 years ago. But now the opportunity is there.
So there's a bunch of things, and that's what's exciting. So the thing that excites me most about JamFactory is its multifaceted nature. So, the core of our activity is a training program. Mm-hmm. It's probably the least well understood thing publicly about what we do. Mm-hmm. But it's the kind of heartbeat. We're a retailer, a wholesaler, a manufacturer of bespoke commission things. We run a series of businesses through our studios that run, workshops for the public, that do trophies and awards for sporting organisations. Sure. We develop exhibitions that tour, scholarly exhibitions with, research outcomes and so on. And we're a landlord. We're now a tourism business as well. So there's all those things. Now, what's great about that is that they all are interrelated, and it's this kind of integrated model, the whole integrated design thing. It's about looking at these things across a range of intersections with the world, whether it's through education, whether it's through shopping, whether it's through, corporate experiences, whatever. There's an opportunity, sort of touch point for the JamFactory and all those things. And so how do we use those multiple platforms to grow and expand what we do and the benefits that we provide back to our sector and the community more broadly. And so each of them have to grow simultaneously. So I'm interested in, for example, our retail expanding. So, with Seppeltsfield we now have 3 shops. The next stage is to open one interstate in Sydney or Melbourne. So it's a logical progression. We have a range of products that we manufacture in the studios. And they're distributed to shops around the country currently. We need to kind of ramp that up and distribute those products to key high-profile outlets internationally. We run an exhibition program which we now present across 2 venues, and a touring program. So we have 3 shows on the road now that are touring. Each of them will go to 10, 12 venues. That's again another way of exposing our values and the kinds of things that we represent to a different audience. So regional galleries all over the country. Sure. We need to be doing those sorts of exhibitions internationally. And the reason for that is and that kind of national and international kind of expansion of our activities is that we attract people to our training program from all over the country and around the world. Yeah. We want to increasingly lift the benchmark of the calibre of the people coming into that training program, because all the things that we produce are produced largely by the people in that training program.
Exactly right.
So if we can get this cycle of constant improvement,
you're lifting the ceiling of what's possible. It's
correct.
And instead of pushing the city, like pushing Adelaide from from behind, you're pulling it up behind you. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. So if we're attracting the world's best and brightest in the areas that we're specialist in, and we had applications for our training program in glass. Now we're only taking 3 people in next year. We had applications from 5 continents for that program for next year. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is.
And the calibre is very high. Now, and glass is a more that program has higher profile than the others in our mix, but we're increasingly building the profile of the others. And so we've got a fabulous Italian industrial designer is working in the field, who's coming to do the 2-year program in the metal studio next year. Because he wants to improve his hand skills working with metal, understanding the material to improve his design practice and kind of distinguish himself in a global marketplace. So it's kind of opportunities that I think are there for us to be that unique combination of design and craftsmanship that we offer and we have a strong track record in can be supported and perpetuated through all those vehicles, the touring exhibitions, product out there in the commercial marketplace, alumni from our training program being great ambassadors for us, spread throughout the world.
This network just grows.
Yeah.
So the next question was, what does the JamFactory look like in 2030? And you kind of explained that a bit, but you're playing the long game with your vision. Are you still the CEO potentially in 2030?
2030?
It's not that far away.
It's not that far away. We did, on the back of our 40th anniversary, which is this year, we did our board and our chair, Peter Vaughan, led a 2023 planning exercise. So I was looking at what would our 50th anniversary look like. And I will share with you the document from that. I'll email it to you before we go. Okay. Or at least the kind of document that went into the exercise, which was me coming up with a dozen kind of ambitious propositions that talked about what we might look like. So our shop in Sydney that is also a kind of wine bar and cafe that runs public workshops, all under the JamFactory brand. Our manufacturing sector partnership in the furniture industry in South Australia to have a range of JamFactory branded commercial furniture being supplied by Stylecraft to Southeast Asia. Negotiations about a standalone shop in Hong Kong based on the success of our distribution into that market over the past few years. This is a kind of hypothetical around what 2023 might look like. Yeah. So it'd be useful. You can extrapolate from it.
No, that's.
But even those few examples I've just used give you a sense of what I think the ambition for this place should be. Certainly we should be having a great engagement with Asia as an organisation. And I think that there are a number of expansion opportunities. For instance, the area of textiles is one that it's the missing link in terms of our material disciplines and the kind of craft area. JamFactory did have in its history a knitted textiles and a woven textiles workshop.
That sort of is, I don't know, it's not as current.
No,
maybe.
no, but textiles itself has strong possibilities, and particularly say screen printed textiles as a production business platform.
Because that sort of has popped up by itself around Adelaide at the moment.
So there are some really
yeah.
good independent practice, and the whole kind of Etsy market, which is a kind of huge growing DIY craft-based industry.
Yeah.
60% of that activity is textiles related.
Yeah, okay.
Whether it's funky pillowcases for kids or scrunchies for hair ties or whatever, it is all sorts of craft-based, textiles-based stuff. Now, it's a space that we should be playing in at the highest level, and so I think there's a real gap opportunity there. The way that we run studio facilities is also a kind of replicable model, and I think there are other parts of regional South Australia that might benefit from the kind of thing that we've done in the Barossa.
Yeah, definitely.
You
see KI as well. There's all kinds of
places. KI could work, but somewhere like Goolwa, the whole kind of, there's a sort of critical mass of activity down around the sort of, like Alexandrina region and stuff. So there are some real opportunities.
But no, there is. It's good. Have a breather. You're doing a lot of talking. Maybe just pull back a bit and just.
Yeah, sorry, you'll have to go through all this too.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll enjoy listening to it again. It's fine. So in this publication, you talk about, and this is that bottom up type stuff that we've talked about, and it's something that I buy into completely. That you discuss the importance of community and collaboration in the 40-year publication. Do you think that the growing popularity of co-work spaces around the world today kind of demonstrates how visionary the JamFactory was 40 years ago?
Yeah, completely. I mean, one of the interesting things for me is all this talk about hubs and so on, and the shiny new pin stuff that happens with some of them. Here's one that has been going for 40 years, has resulted in significant economic impact for the country, and you often have to kind of remind people, governments and bureaucracies that their enthusiasm for these ideas, when they're seen as something new, can shift their focus from the asset that they already have in the CBD.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's an interesting one, and
not that there shouldn't be more.
No, of course
and more the merrier. But it's easier to invest in new things and to kind of talk about them as new things when in fact there are models that are already doing some of that.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the difference is, we talk about some of these hubs that are opening up and the new models. I'm not an expert on them by any stretch of the imagination, but there seems to be that lack of what we talked about, that having the creation and all that is great, but there's the enterprise entrepreneurial side of it that's missing, and that integrated approach to everything, and that's
Correct.
what the JamFactory does provide.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps these co-work spaces are just the physical space, and yes, you might have some crossover, but it's purely based on the people that you inject in that space, and you don't know what's going to happen. Whereas this is a really kind of controlled.
Yeah, the model here is interesting because there is such a lot of successful commercial activity taking place that people absorb, see, or participate in firsthand within the building. So if you're a tenant in one of our studios, not only are you cross-pollinating with people in those shared workshop type instances, but you're also kind of being roped in from time to time to work on a big commercial project, or at least watching one emerge. You have marketing and sales people in the same building, so you can bounce ideas off them around those things. So that the kind of professional business trajectory of a creative practice is nurtured in this environment as much as the sort of creative thinking practice. And that's what's quite different about this. And then, so the people that go through our training program, or even more importantly, that perhaps have been through the training program and have had been a tenant in the studios for a while after that, they walk away with these extraordinary experiences, deep cross-area networks, with already successful businesses that then grow and expand as great ambassadors for what we do here. So, many of them creating their own new hubs.
Yeah, it's kind of sort of a Fibonacci thing that happens and just expand exponentially.
We're a funny business in a sense, is that we actively create and promote competition for ourselves. We produce people who will compete with us. We think that's good. We think that's healthy. So, we're not cheap, so we're never competing on price. So we're not disadvantaged in the marketplace.
And that's right. And that's a key thing that I think Adelaide can learn a lot from, is that you don't have to compete necessarily with what happens in Melbourne or anywhere else in the world. Just do it here, right, and the best in the world. And that's something that we can, really benefit from. So yeah, on that idea, with the model that is the JamFactory, do you think that this trend of the co-work space can look to the JamFactory and see the working model, and that this kind of atelier type model has applications to other areas of the creative industries? So, like, for example, is there potential for that to spread across into architecture, or into, could you eventually have like architecture, marketing, graphic design all in one house kind of thing, where they're all sort of leveraging off each other? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, look, I think it is. I think, the way that people work is evolving so incredibly. And, my personal belief is innovation happens between things, so between fields of knowledge, between types of experience, whatever. So it's innovation is what happens in the gaps. That's where the new things are. And, the ways in which people can collaborate in work terms has evolved, obviously through technologies, but also through, just changing lifestyle stuff. The idea of getting a job in a firm and that job being the job that you do for a long time, that disappeared a long time ago. And so people freelance and contract and do all sorts of other things, and they will work for one organisation but have a number of other interests that they pursue that are income generating.
Case example for that, yeah. But I mean,
it's absolutely. We have Danielle Toe and Emma Aston here.
That's my next question.
As a tenant in one of our studios, contributing to that building community. Emma works for us 3 days a week, managing our production sales stuff, which her business and design practice informs that stuff, and that stuff informs her business and design practice. So there's a kind of synergy there. Yeah, and
because that's a perfect segue. No, because the question about Emma was that you engaged her, she's a young Adelaide-based designer who sort of emerged with Daniel, and they were successful instantly. A lot of hard work, but
they achieved a lot of profile instantly.
Yes.
The challenge,
which is something that I guess to harness.
Yeah, I mean, I think they went through a great struggle of having extraordinary global profile at a very,
relatively young
emergent stage. They were being lauded and respected much more in other countries and interstate than they were here. And so the pressure for them to relocate, which is what happens to lots of people, was fairly significant, particularly given that a lot of that publicity doesn't instantly translate to financial viability, let alone success.
Sure.
And so you know, providing employment, which we've done, has been a great way to keep people like that here.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they'd mind me saying that without some of that kind of cash flow, being engaged with JamFactory, it might not have been viable for them to stay in Adelaide. So I think, in some ways, that's something JamFactory should be able to do. It should be able to both attract great people from around the world to be here, but also contribute to retaining them.
Well, that was a question I wanted to ask when you're talking about attracting these amazing designers from around the world. Does that then push out the opportunities for the local designers?
You want it to be a permeable membrane, you know, so you want free flow of people and ideas in and out. That's a healthy mix. You don't want you know, high wall borders that make it difficult for people to come or go. You know, and that's what will be attractive to people. So, you know, with someone like John Goulder coming next year to run our furniture studio, with Daniel and Emma hanging around in the building, with people like this Italian industrial designer coming to be in our metal studio, and a growing kind of cohort of alumni who are setting up their own, you know, collective workspaces and studios and stuff. There's a, you know, and I'm thinking here about people like, you know, John Kwan and Kumi with their Studio Mono, you know, and Gareth Brown and what he's been doing with Sam Agostino, with Agostino Brown. So there's kind of alumni from the JamFactory that are setting up quite good, interesting, different kind of model design or craft businesses. All these people are kind of, you know, aware of each other, and, you know, there's something building.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I was going to say, you know, is there something that younger, like talking about Emma and Daniel, and like, is there something that young generation, so my generation that's coming through, is there something that we offer that's different to previous generations? And is that part of why you're talking about, you know, the way we work is changing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I look at Daniel and Emma, and I want them here, right? I mean, I have worked hard to keep them engaged in the JamFactory, because I think they represent something that is a kind of new approach to the field that JamFactory is in. Their understanding of the global communications environment and the way that you can use that to you know, generate productive business is different to however it's been in the past. And so their expertise, you know, and so here I see them not as young people, but as people with expertise that is of great value to all of our team and to me, you know. So, you know, at 44, I kind of now feel sometimes like I'm part of an old guard. And that's fine.
But I disagree in the sense. No. I disagree because you having that awareness, I think it's something that is lost on potentially some of the older generations, and there's the sense of legacy and
that's true.
And succession is kind of lost, and
I'm hungry for the new, and I see people like that connecting to the new, and so I want to connect to them. You know, and to you, and, you know, it's because I know that that's what's in the best interest of the future of the sector. You know, and that said, I think, you know, I also have great respect for the kind of purity of craft as well, and that, you know, I want to ensure that we can support people whose ambition is to pursue their dream of being able to sustain a successful livelihood from producing beautiful things with their hands for a market that exists somewhere in the world. You know, that's a good thing too. So there's the kind of maintaining something quite ancient in terms of a trajectory, as well as supporting new hybrid modes of practice. And I think that we want to be a broad church in that sense.
I like the fact you're referring to it as church. I mean, it is. It's a, you know,
the risk of being evangelical.
Well, no, committing to something that you never know if it's actually going to turn out in the end. You know, that's what we are. It may not pay out in the end. You know,
there is a certain degree of faith required.
Yeah, that's right. So, what's your advice to young creatives in exploring the opportunities interstate and overseas? I mean, you've talked about how you're trying to keep some of them here, but what?
Look, I do want to keep some of them here. I don't want to keep all of them here. I want many of them to go elsewhere and talk about what happens here, either to replicate the model, or to encourage people to come our way. That would be a good thing. A drama school like NIDA is successful because people like your Mel Gibsons and Russell Crowes and people that have been associated with it are out there in the world making good and acknowledging where they came from. I want that to happen for this place, and it does. So for different people, different places are going to make sense. But you don't want it to be crucial for people to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
So there has to be some interesting opportunities that will keep some people here. And the glass thing is interesting. We, as I said, there are very few access workshops that you can work with hot glass without the extraordinary expense of setting your own workshop up, and there are people that can afford to do that who are very successful, but that's not very many people. And so we've attracted over 40 years quite a lot of glass artists to South Australia from all over the world, particularly North America, Canada, the United States, who've relocated here permanently, either because they fell in love with someone, but mostly because of the access to facilities and connection to a community. So we have a disproportionately high number of glass artists in this town. So, Seattle, maybe, Venice and the whole, older tradition there. Not many other places. Canberra and Adelaide. There's a couple of others around the world, but so it's a city where you can come and be part of a very supportive community of people with similar interests.
Yeah, and it doesn't take long to become entrenched in it, which is the
That's
beauty
right.
of Adelaide,
That's
which
right.
is, I think, the biggest opportunity that we can realise is that, so many of the projects that I work on, the reason I'm able to make them work is because there's people out there who have the same sort of, they want to do the same thing, and it's 2 phone calls away to find that person.
That's right.
And that's what makes Adelaide
accessibility.
Accessibility.
Yeah. Across, having worked in Sydney for 13 years, the contrast is extreme.
Steve talks about it. He says, if you live on one side of the harbour, you don't...
Correct.
You might...
Correct. I lived at Nelson's Point, right, which was walking distance to Circular Quay across the bridge, and it was a great thing to do. We had friends who just thought it was too far, because they were in, Surrey Hills.
Yeah, sure. I don't know where you're talking about, but I get the... Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, it's a good segue into we're almost there. The next question, which was, you've chosen now to call Adelaide home, and for the foreseeable future, you've bought a home here. What do you think is its best and worst defining traits?
Look, I think that the scale and accessibility stuff is really important. Here I am in a role which is, managing a modest size arts organisation, and yet I can have access to, political leaders, the sort of lions of business in this town, and all the kind of real influence makers directly. You know, I can have lunch with them. In Sydney, my experience working in a similar sort of organisation was that, you know, the queue is just way too long. If you can get time with any of those people, it's so compromised by the competing interests that making things happen is so much harder. So I love that you can make things happen here because of that accessibility. You know, the Seppeltsfield thing, you know, to have had that happen in such a short time frame, from first conversation through to, you know, cutting a ribbon, is certainly unbelievable in you know, Sydney or Melbourne, in my experience. I think that there is a strong support for cultural industries in this town, and that political leaders of both parties and the corporate sector have a strong engagement with the cultural industries. I think that there is certainly a great momentum within the cultural industries in this town. I look at, you know, what is happening with the festivals, Fringe and the Adelaide Festival in particular, and the kind of, you know, quite dramatic evolution going on in them. I look at what Nick Mitrovic is doing at the Art Gallery, and he's breathed fresh new life into that organisation. You know, I think, and then we have these kind of extraordinary little jewels, things like the Museum of Economic Botany and Carrick Hill, and Tandanya is an underutilised, under-considered thing. You know, National Indigenous Institute. You know, so there's a lot of good in that sense, and I love the kind of pace and you know, lifestyle that Adelaide affords. You know, that my work-life balance. I think I work harder now than I've ever worked, but actually, you know, I ride my bike to and from work every day, and you know, we are lucky to have
the ride home would be harder, I'm assuming.
It's tough. It's tough on days like that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Hopefully that change comes through for you.
Yeah.
And have a northerly in your back.
Yeah, no, it's normally headwind both ways.
Yeah.
So 15 k's each way. Yeah. But so, you know, it is a place where I've found I can balance working at the kind of highest level in terms of, you know, working in the sort of business and commerce and arts sector in a capital city, with a kind of lifestyle that is appealing and would be appealing for anyone anywhere in the world. The downsides are that, you know, we have a tendency towards naysaying in public commentary. I don't think it's representative of the majority of people, but it's certainly the majority of commentary. And we have a kind of oppositional media, so media that is looking for the gotcha moment, you know, and that what that does is it polarises issues around kind of critique and defence, and rather than kind of weighing up issues and looking at opportunities.
More holistic approach.
Yeah, so and you know, and that is replicated across, you know, the sort of major print and, you know, radio media in particular, which tend to lead the sort of public debate, and I think that gives the perception that there's a sort of anti kind of progress, anti new ideas, but I don't think that's actually true. I think that that perception is created by a negative kind of media, and I think that's happening around the country to a certain extent. but it's particularly noticeable here. Noticeable for someone who moved here from another place. The conversations I have with people are generally extraordinarily optimistic. We have chairman's lunches here, and we get the top end of town around the table, a dozen at a time, and every single time the conversations about what people are doing and what's possible are optimistic, and yet the sort of public debate, generally looks a bit more negative than that.
It's interesting. I think what you're talking about as the best traits and the worst traits are intertwined, because the accessibility and the ease of making things happen, equally the other way, means that if something is portrayed negatively by one person, can be embraced very quickly by the general public.
Correct.
And that's something that we'll have to learn to change, I suppose.
Yeah, but in some ways, I think that the sense of the community having a voice and the history of activism in this state is a great asset. So I think that I think we should be, incredibly welcoming of this breadth of views, and I like the kind of, the sort of heritage and conservative kind of stuff.
Sure.
Balancing off some of the kind of more radical things. I think if you arrive at a point through informed discussion, it's going to be a much better kind of point than if one or other of those things. And so so in some ways maybe that polarised public debate, maybe has contributed to some of the good outcomes. And I mean, people talk about all sorts of negative stuff, but I look at the way I see like Brisbane has developed and how ugly, both conceptually and aesthetically, a lot of that development has been, because it's been sort of top down and kind of pummeled through, and I think that things like the economic tragedies of the state bank collapse and so forth, that meant that things have evolved a bit differently here, and it's kind of, the foundations are just much more interesting. The kind of, the framework that exists to build on is a really good one. And all of this new development that's happening at the moment, which, had and still has such a lot of polarised debate around it, is still clearly having positive impact on all sorts of social and economic factors. The Samri building that's about to open is a really good example of that. It's a tricky one.
It is. No, it's good. So it's to finish off, then going back to the Adelaide Finger in Residence series, I often refer back to Charles Landry a lot when he was here. And the one line, or the one sort of section that I have sort of framed what I might try and get out of this sort of 12 feature sort of series, is regarding leadership. And you've given me a lot of information, you've talked a lot, and the common thread is that there needs to be that leadership at all levels, with everything. And for things to be successful, you talked about at the beginning with the Seppeltsfield and just the JamFactory generally, that one person saw an opportunity, but then they stalked other people that were leaders in their field, and it kind of all these people working together is what makes it work. Charles Landry said there are three types of leaders. There's the ordinary leader, who simply reflects back those that they are representing. There is the innovative leader, who jumbles the things around a bit in innovative patterns, and there are circumstances where that is right. But there are moments of choice and opportunity where we need visionary leadership. The kind of leadership where the person projects a compelling story, where it touches people in their gut in such a way that they are triggered into action. And that leadership gives away power. For every ounce of power they give away, they generate a pound of influence. Do you agree, first of all?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm interested in a lot of Landry's writing as well. But, the best leadership, in my view, is in leading a process to bring people together to excel. In a sense, and whether that's within a team or organisation, or across a city. It's the same thing. It's the same qualities required. So much of what I do in my job is simply encouraging other people to do their best, and trying to help them.
To connect, facilitate.
That's right. So, and most of what we deal with these days is complex, and so there are very few things where isolation is an advantage. Now there are some still, and I talked about the craft ideal of the individual. Now that's there, but most often it's going to be about complicated things, and the best way to tackle complicated things is with lots of people that know lots of stuff about each of the different bits of that complexity. So yeah, when we're employing people here, we're thinking about how well they might complement the other people and skills that we have. When we're looking at doing projects with partners out there in the community, it's who's good at stuff we're not.
It's kind of like weakest link in the chain type thing, where find out where our resources aren't up to scratch and how can we fix that gap and collectively build the whole thing.
Yeah, and it starts with a good idea. I think that, and it need not be your own idea.
And it really is in the creative industry.
That's the thing about leadership is recognising when ideas are good. And for me, it's about. I think the only natural strength I have I was good at drawing at school, which is how I got into the arts. But I think the only natural strength I have as a leader is in storytelling. And I think that the value of storytelling is, it's extraordinary. If you can capture people's imagination, you can capture their energy, their finance, it is.
Some people might call that salesmanship, but I don't even think it's.
It's not. It could be, and it could be, dressed up or manipulated in that way. But actually,
sales, that's not like the product already exists. It's a different thing. This is about making the product.
That's right. And stories. Stories are powerful in marketing terms. There's no doubt about that, and they're deeply connected to our the sense of the history of civilization. That's how it works. So if you can activate people by piquing their interest in something, then you're 3/4 of the way to where you need to get to. And the best way I think to do that is to be able to kind of tell a good story, make a convincing argument for something.
So is that the type of leadership Adelaide needs now?
I think any place needs a bunch of different kinds of leader. I'm very lucky. I have a chair in Peter Vaughan who's a very different kind of leader to me, and we've learnt some things from each other, I think. But I think that those different types of leadership, and that's in a sort of micro situation, but I think across an industry in a city or across a city, you do need people that are good at different things in leadership roles. I think that'll be an interesting thing to draw out in your
that's
set of stories.